Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, which means we are LinkedIn Live for all of you. And I am thrilled to have my special guest today, Amy Gardner from Apochromatik. Did I say it right? I think I did.
Apochromatik. You're close. You're close. Apochromatik.
Yeah, which is a fantastic name. And I tell you, I had to look it up what it meant because I wanted to know. I thought surely this has something, has a good meaning behind it. And for all of you that don't know, it's a type of camera lens, right? That like
Telescope
removes
lens.
distortions and things. And I was like, oh, what a great name for a consulting firm that is, bringing you clarity in your business. So I thought that was super fun. Is there a story how you found it, the name, or how you knew about it?
There is. So I'm a former IP litigator. I practiced litigation and IP litigation at a big law firm for a long time at Gardner in Chicago. And then I was at a mid-sized firm where I practiced IP litigation. And so because of that experience, I knew the importance of us getting a trademark for our name when I left. I was a dean of students at the University of Chicago, left that job so that we could found Apochromatik and get my coaching certification, all that good stuff. So there was a particular name that I wanted, and initial searches looked like the trademark would be fine. And then once we hired a trademark lawyer, because even as an IP litigator, I hired a trademark lawyer to get the trademark. He came back and said, actually, the secondary search, I think there's some problems here. And I was so wedded to that name. There's a good lesson here, right? But then I passed it over to my partner and husband, Keith, and said, all right, I give up. Like, I'm busy bringing in clients, working with clients. I don't have time to figure out a new name. I liked the old one. And so he, as an avid photographer, he came up with Apochromatik. We changed the C at the end to K. So that's why it has the A at the beginning and the K at the end. And that's why it became our name. So it's ironic because at the time, we wanted to help people find clarity about their careers and did not predict we would also be helping people find clarity about their teams. But it ended up being a great name, and he gets all the credit for that.
This is so fun. So you and I met, I think, was it a Women's
Bar
Association? Yeah. When I was a couple years back, I did because it's like a couple years now. This whole pandemic year is just weird, right in the middle of everything. I was doing some workshops for the Women's Bar Association, and Amy happened to be in the audience, and we connected and had a great conversation. It's been years since we, I think, had that conversation, but found there's a lot of synergy between our feelings about team building and presence and how executives are showing up in the workforce, and of course my work with lawyers at the time, and I still dabble in it whenever I get a chance, and so I thought it would be great to have you with us this morning for that kind of take or a different look from the outside, particularly because to kind of fill out your bio, it's not like you just decided to work with lawyers. You actually were an attorney. You are a member of the bar. So you've been in those shoes. Then you also, as you mentioned, as dean of students at the law school, you saw like young lawyers and what they were dealing with and needing to find work and all of those things, and now putting all of that together to coach attorneys and their firms. And so and I find that sometimes that's one of the first questions people would ask me when I was talking to lawyers. They'd be like, oh, so you're a recovering lawyer, or oh, you're so you where did you practice law, those kind of questions. And I would be like, no, actually, I'm not a lawyer. I just have all sorts of fancy body language certifications instead. So it's great that you come with that authority with them. And so I thought we would just start with a kind of broad question of what do you see as mistakes that people are making when it comes to their executive presence? Because I think everybody has a slightly different take on it, but I do think there are some kind of pervasive things that for some reason are still out there that people are kind of shooting themselves in the foot when it comes their executive presence. So do you have any thoughts on that? What are you seeing?
Sure. Well, so first of all, I have to correct one thing you said. You totally undersold that workshop. If you haven't seen Allison do a workshop or haven't had Allison do a workshop for your organization, I tend to go to a lot of, or used to go to a lot of workshops, and now I go to a lot of webinars and conferences online. And it's not often that you attend a workshop and think, that presenter is amazing. That was really helpful, and I can apply it right away. And that's something that I always aim for. So I always appreciate it and in the things that I attend. And so I reached out to Allison afterwards and said, "Oh my gosh, I want to talk to you." So one of the things that I see, of course, one of the things that I see with executive presence is we often don't think about it. And I think that's especially the case right now. And there are lots of good reasons for that. And I do want to stress that I appreciate and understand that this is an incredibly challenging time for a lot of people for a variety of reasons. So if you are trying to get, as one of my clients is, trying to get the 5-year-old to sit down and do kindergarten online and be on time for your own meetings, it is understandable why sometimes you may just screech in and turn on the computer, and that is the best you can do that day. But if you do have the capacity to just take a few small steps, you really can improve your executive presence. So I would say that that's the biggest mistake, is just not thinking about it in the flurry of everything else that's going on in the world or in your world. And the thing is that it can really make a difference to just take some few steps and to make it a priority among all the other priorities. And the ironic part is that if you make your executive presence a priority, it can help make many of those other issues easier for you.
Right. There is a little bit of, I think, because I have the title, almost like that with the title comes the presence, and that really isn't necessarily true. That and people, I think too, when you have that title, of course, their expectation is higher as well. So there's that almost double-edged sword. If you are slamming into the meeting right on time, depending on who's on the meeting with you, the biggest thing that I keep telling people is just communicate more. I think we need to, if that is the situation that you were coming from, then when you turn on the camera, I think it's okay in this day and age to say, wow, glad I made it. The 5-year-old is now working. We'll see how long it lasts, or something. It's okay to put those things in there so that people know, rather than just sort of, I think, pretending that it's not there. Because right at the very beginning, I think we were all doing that, and now we've gotten to the point where it's a year later, and so there's a little bit of guilt, like we should be over that or we should be beyond it. But that's still our reality, is that all the stuff is going on, and maybe we just need to say something about it. Are you finding that the lighting and the setup for virtual is still a challenge, or do you feel like people have sort of finally gotten that message that that they need to work on their background and have good lighting and all of that kind of thing? Or are you still like, I still have to say this?
It's so funny that you say that, because I do think that last March there was this understanding, ring lights were sold out everywhere and standing desks were not to be found, and many of us were just working at a kitchen table or with a kitchen chair, which is not remotely helpful for your back necessarily. And I think that there was a lot of understanding then. I think that some of us just sort of got comfortable with the way things were. And I think a lot of us assumed, I'm just not going to turn the camera on. I'm just going to put on a fake background, whatever. And the reality is that now, a year later, people do expect that you have your background professional and as best as it can be. And I think that a lot of people understand that. So there might be people watching this thinking, yeah, tell me something I don't know. But we do workshops for law firms and bar associations, in-house counsel teams, and then other employers. And we regularly see, the people who log on, and most of what you see is the ceiling, the people who have the basket of laundry behind them. And I want to stress that we all feel empathy and we all want to marshal that empathy. But the reality is that if you're logging on to pitch a client, or you have to have a tough conversation with your team, they see the things behind you. And it just sends a message, especially now when we don't have 9 hours in the same place where we can ride the elevator together or bump into each other at the coffee pot. What people see is that limited time where it's what you're putting out. And you really do yourself a disservice in terms of how you're being viewed and your executive presence and your leadership if you don't just take a few minutes and try to improve the background. And there will always be the day. I was on a training not too long ago where a naked 3-year-old walked up to his mom's laptop and said, "Mommy, who are you talking to on TV?" I mean, there will always be those situations, right? And I think we all want to understand and have empathy and give grace, but the background is something you can control, right? You can't control the cat, but you can control what's behind you normally. So encourage people to take a moment and look at that. And though I love the Rate My Skype Room Twitter account. It is one of my favorite things from the last year. It has great advice, and they're analyzing prominent journalists and actors' backgrounds. So it can give you some great tips on setting up.
Right. I was very surprised at, and still sometimes surprised at, the reporters who have just, or, their camera angles are just so bad still. They're still like looking down at people like this because they've fixed the cameras below them and they're about it. It's like, I don't understand that. And before we get off this topic, one of my pet peeves, and I will just put this out there, if you're going to use a virtual background, then you need to invest the 20 or $30 in a pop-up green screen so that you don't pixelate so much in that screen. Even if your company provided it for you and it is expected that you have the company logo splashed like wallpaper behind you, do yourself a favor and get yourself a green screen, because it's really hard to watch somebody for any length of time when they have this line around their head or their hands are going in and out as they're gesturing, because I'm, of course, a big proponent of go ahead and gesture. Let people see who you are. If you use your hands in real life, use your hands on Zoom. You don't have to sit on them. But if you're using a virtual background and we can't see the fingers because they keep coming in and out, that's going to be really annoying. So yeah, I guess if you're using a virtual background without a green screen, then do sit on your hands. But
there's all this research that shows that people are less likely to trust you if you have a virtual background. So
because they wonder what you're hiding, right? I mean, it's literally, you're like, oh, so messy background today or whatever. Even just a very simple trifold screen from any of your world market import sort of places that just, you can plop that up behind you and hide whatever it is. Because I understand there's a lot of people that are sharing offices, particularly when both partners are at home. And let's face it, our homes, if they even have an office, or if you have designated a bedroom as an office or something, there's usually just one, because only one person would be home at a time. And my office has been taken over, so I don't, I'm in the dining room myself, right here. And because I gave it up early on, because my office was actually like half office, half like gaming playroom, because usually, the kids would need it at night, right? After hours, they would be doing their thing with the TV and whatever on the one side of the room. Well, suddenly they're home all day and they want to be using it on their lunch breaks and whatever. Or over the summer, they wanted to be using it more often. And so I just was like, forget it. I'm just leave it. And so
I have a client who he's been using the baby's room, and he was going for partner over the last year, which he was successful in his quest to make partner. But one of the issues that he was running into was you could see the baby's crib behind him. And so what the very creative solution he and his wife came up with was he started using the standing or the changing table as a standing desk. And then they painted a mural above the crib. So when he's talking to his clients, you see the mural, you don't know that there's a crib below him. So
That's great.
that was their creative solution. So I think, again, in the beginning, people really understood. We were all just trying to hold it together with Scotch tape. And now I think people appreciate and notice if you can take a few minutes to, pop a plant behind you. I know that our angle's a little goofy with this program, but I mean, I never had any plants behind me until last March, and I've worked remotely for years. But all of a sudden, I realized, oh wow, that makes it look a little more lively, I guess. And so, take the time to. You don't need to be an interior decorator, but stop and think. What message do I want to convey? If you are more playful, maybe you want to put one of those bobbleheads behind you, right?
Right,
If you're not a
exactly.
hoarder,
There's
maybe clean out the junk. Right? Do those things.
Yeah, exactly. I know I struggled for a while even with what to put behind me. And then when I put it up, I was like, oh, wait, I have to take the glass out because now
Right. That's the
so
glare.
there's actually no frame. It's just like the print without I had to take all the glass out and take the frame down because it was too glary. So and then I'm still figuring out what to do on this other side. Still have plans, but it hasn't happened. So one of the things that I was curious about, because I don't feel like my programs or something, for some reason, I feel like sometimes I leave out the young folks that are joining the workforce. And so, what is there any advice for young folks coming in? Like, how do you get noticed for the right reasons um, versus perhaps the wrong either vocal ones or dress code ones or whatever? I mean, are they doing a good job? The folks that I talk to that are younger that seem that are looking for jobs are sort of like, well, we spent a lot of time doing case law, but we really didn't spend any time on like our presence or our body language, particularly on in trial or anything like that. So um what advice is there for the young folks that aren't seasoned yet?
So I think one easy way to distinguish yourself is to focus on improving your executive presence, paying attention to your body language and how you show up. I mean, the reality is that if you were hired for the job, they expected you were going to learn, and that goes for any stage of your career, right? They expect that you're going to be learning some things, which means you're going to be making some mistakes, but being able to show up and uh, impress in terms of what being client ready and somebody that can be trusted to go to important meetings, or even if it's logging on, or hopefully someday soon going to, heaven forbid, a meeting in person. They want to know that you're able to handle those sorts of situations, because there are probably 1,000 people that they could hire to write that brief, or in the case of lawyers, many more than 1,000 people who could be hired to do exactly the same task. And you have to think about how you can show up and instill confidence and represent the firm or the company or whatever type of employer it is well. And that's a great way to distinguish yourself. Assume that once you have that basic level of able to do the job, then you can really elevate yourself in your standing by working on things like your executive presence, your professionalism, your body language, to really to stand out.
Is there any body language like problem that you see with that younger, like a difference generationally? Sometimes I feel like I see stuff and sometimes I feel like I don't. But is there anything that you think, um, again, kind of sabotages them a little bit or lessens their authority when it comes to their body language?
I think that some of it has to do probably with imposter syndrome, which is something that we talk about a lot, in the sense of being afraid that people are going to figure out you don't belong or you shouldn't be there. And I think that then shows up visibly in body language. I saw something that you did about people who walk into a meeting carrying everything close to them, right? So they have their binder and their laptop and all that. It's almost like a barricade. Right? And that just, then you see people sit down in a meeting, and there have been studies done about how women take up less space than they need. And in a very real way, physically claiming the space that you need makes such a difference. And certainly we don't see that the same way right now with Zoom, but I do see a lot of people who don't turn their cameras on. And we do a 1-minute video every Tuesday called the Apochromatik on the Apochromatik LinkedIn, or the Apochromatik rather, LinkedIn page. And then I also post it to my LinkedIn page as well. Keith does too. And we had a video over the summer where we show what does it look like, when you have your video off. It looks like you have a bag over your head. And I think that that's something that, a lot of people will just think, not today. And yeah, there's certainly, there may be a day where you're just, the camera's not going to happen that day. But the problem is that then that becomes the default and you really lose something. I mean, you'd never go to a meeting and hide under the table, right? You wouldn't do it.
You wouldn't, exactly.
So if you wouldn't do that, then do what you can to have that camera on. And, I was in a training about a week ago, a women's networking event where the speaker talked about how women should, and I quote, always wear makeup on Zoom, and you should always have your hair pulled back on Zoom, and you should always do these things. I mean, just do the best you can, right? Just to show up, be willing to engage, and to think a moment about your executive presence and how you want to show up while you're logging on. Just take a moment. How do I want to show up in this meeting? And then try to manage your executive presence, your body language, so that you can achieve that goal.
Right. The one thing that I think is really sort of funny is as I always give my posture tip, which is just, sit up. Even here, I started to get comfortable, but if you are leading the meeting, right, I mean, just that little bit of difference from kind of being just here to being here is big. And even virtually, this comes through. And the difference, as you said, from even difference in age or gender or anything, like that's the one thing that can project confidence. It's the one thing that projects I should be here. I do belong, versus to kind of get over that imposter syndrome. And to your point about the cameras being off, it's funny because I was talking to some younger people that I'm mentoring and things, and I sort of asked them, I said, okay, so tell me, you guys are like 20 something, and probably should be more used to, I guess I would think, being on camera or not being so afraid because of your Instagram or whatever. And it was funny. They're like, no, we don't turn our cameras on either. Like we're almost worse because we feel like we don't have everything together, and it's not Instagrammable how they look today, so they're not turning their cameras on either. And I was like, wow. And then I was like, well, nobody says anything to you about that? And they're like, well, nobody's really had that conversation. So then I started having the conversation with managers of, you need to have that conversation. If you expect the cameras to be on, don't just ignore it and then be annoyed when people don't turn their cameras on. If you expect them to have their cameras on, then you need to communicate that. The expectation is that your cameras are on, unless there is some extreme extenuating circumstances besides I don't have lip gloss. So
and if you think about it, so I was talking to somebody the other day, and she said she's on a meeting every week with 100 people on this meeting. And, maybe 80 people have their cameras off. And so her point was, I'm not going to turn my camera on for that. And I said, okay, well, that may make sense depending on the culture, whatever. It's a 100-person meeting. On the other hand, if you do turn your camera on, that means you'll be on the first screen.
You'll be the one that gets noticed. And that's what I tell people all the time, too. This is particularly for women. This is now a very huge equalizer. Right? There isn't, depending on where you sit around the table, there's no, you can, as you see, put the camera on and then you're getting the FaceTime. Think about it, people. You're getting FaceTime if you just turn your cameras on. And those kinds of things are important because I also think there becomes the other people on the team, if you're the one with your camera off, there's a little bit of, well, why does he get to have his camera off, or why does she get to have her camera? It's like, what is that privilege that suddenly somebody's allowed to have their camera off? Or I didn't get the memo. Are we allowed to have our cameras off? It just starts this whole thing. And I think you're absolutely right that if you put your camera on, you are first in the screen. I encourage managers nowadays to kind of like freeze the screen somewhat, because I don't know whether you find this, but for me, when people are turning their cameras on and off, and it goes from like their picture or their name to them being, and then everybody moves around on the screen and they bump around, and then somebody comes back and now they're at the bottom instead of at the top. So sometimes I say, go in and do the setting where you actually place people now and can put them where you want them, versus, because it's a little jarring when you're talking to them and then their things are moving. So also think about that. Sometimes I think it's easier if you need to just take one step away from your computer, maybe to pull something off the printer or something and then sit back down, is almost a little bit less distracting than going all the way to black and then coming all the way back for people. So there's a lot of little things like that.
One thing that I do when we do a lot of work with teams where we will help teams to build trust, learn how to resolve conflict more effectively, and help people get re-engaged with the mission and values and goals of the organization. So we do a lot of those types of workshops. And one thing that I'll do is I will organize people alphabetically on the screen, or if everybody's sharing something, I'll move the squares around to make sure that people are speaking. And that's something that's really easy as a manager to do. If you feel like you want to make sure that everybody weighs in on a particular issue or something, instead of saying, did everybody have a chance to go? You can just be moving them so whether everyone has spoken or not.
That's a really great tip. I don't know that I've ever used it that way, but I like that. Corinne is here. I wanted to put her little message up because so we wanted to say hi. Make sure that Corinne got a mention. So she's saying good morning to us. We're so happy that you are here. Yes, Corinne was my biggest champion over at the women's bar, which was great. For tenure there.
Such a leader in the legal profession in Chicago and in Illinois. Just fantastic.
And she's great at mentoring, and she also really has good posture and good body language. So we'll put that up. She's learned. I didn't have to school her much on anything. So I do want to make sure that we get in a couple of the things that are coming up for you before we run out of time today. So tell me a little bit about the Future in Focus 2021 Your Attorney Mastermind, for anybody out there that's like, ooh, she's a really smart lady. I would like to work with her.
Well, so we have a 6-month attorney mastermind. The next cohort starts in just a couple of weeks. If you go to futureinfocus2021.com, you can read more about it, and you can also click on a button there that says schedule a free legal career clarity call. And I want to make that offer to any attorney who's watching who wants to have 30 minutes to talk about their legal career. And we can talk about whether one-on-one coaching, whether the Future in Focus Attorney Mastermind might be a good fit for you, but more generally, what's going on in your career. I can suggest some resources that you might want to check out to help you with whatever challenges you're having or want to avoid having down the road. And we actually have, funny enough, we have a free webinar today at noon Central Time. And people can register for that. Just go to futureinfocus2021.com/clarity. And the webinar today is about 3 tools that every lawyer needs to thrive in your career in 2021. So that just so happens that webinar is today.
Oh, that's great. Well, everybody make sure that you get on that. Use your lunchtime wisely. And tomorrow I have one at noon as well. But this one is just called Ask Me Anything, because I feel like we've been doing enough of these lives that enough people have these little I wonder what that means, or they see something on Zoom, or they see something out in there as people are going back to the workforce, which is the last question that we'll touch on. But so if anybody is interested in the Ask Me Anything, you can just kind of send me a quick LinkedIn message or anywhere, and I'll send you the link for that. It is a private register only, because I didn't want it to get too large. So I was a little bit smaller with the campaign, putting it out there, because I didn't want 100 people to, and then they wouldn't be able to ask their questions. So if you have a burning question about body language, tomorrow noon Central is your chance to ask it. So as people are moving back into this sort of hybrid back into the workforce or not. Do you have any tips for folks on that weirdness that now we feel when we actually do see people in person? Yeah, people always ask me about the handshake, and I usually say, well, the handshake will be back eventually. I think politicians like it too much. They're not going to, they're going to want to keep the handshake, or it's become such a part of our culture that I feel that the handshake will come back. But right now, as soon as you see somebody, there's that weird moment of like, oh wait, yeah, we're not allowed to do that. Or do we have masks? And we've gotten so used to seeing people on Zoom without masks that when we go back into the office, it's almost worse because then we can't see their facial expressions. So have you been working with people on that, going back into the conference room or doing mediation, across a table all with masks on? Anything for people on that end?
Yeah, so we are working with a number of organizations on how to manage the issues that are going to come up with hybrid teams, which we know some people are not going to be comfortable coming back to the workplace at the same time as others. We know that if for parents, since kids can't get vaccinated at this point, there will be people who need to continue working from home and who want to continue working from home. And so there's a lot that we're doing with teams around how are we going to set our norms? What is it going to look like? One thing that I would just suggest is that you ask. So if you encounter somebody, on the street or whatever, you just ask, are you comfortable shaking hands? Or just put it out there. And I think another thing, so my dad has been in the VA hospital and nursing home and rehab over the last year. And so he actually hasn't been to a store since last February. And so he had this experience of everybody around him being masked all the time. One of the things that some of the nurses do is they've put up their picture on their shirt so you can see what the person looks like, or they'll wear the clear face masks so that you can see the face. So think through whether something like that might be helpful in your workplace. But I think it's just so important to talk about it, to have that open communication, and to understand that people's experiences over the last year have been very different. The person who went off to their vacation home and had this lovely time in the countryside had a very different experience than the person who may have lost a loved one or has been having family challenges, or whose significant other may have lost their job, something like that. So there's just a wide range. And so whatever you're thinking as the manager is great, but that doesn't mean everybody in the team is going to feel the same way. So you want to have communication about it. And I should also mention, you were asking about tools, that we have a free executive presence assessment that people can take. I forgot to mention that. You can just go to enhancedep.com and it'll ask you a series of questions. And that may be helpful for people who are watching as well.
Great. Yeah, I'll make sure all of those things are in the show notes, so to speak, because it runs live on YouTube, but then I think it's harder to find, like it doesn't just go onto your page necessarily, at least when I'm trying to find it. So I always make sure that I download the recording of the broadcast and make sure that there's show notes. So for anybody that's looking for that, I'll try to get that posted to make sure that all those notes are in there. So I think the overall lesson from today is simply to communicate, to ask for what you need. If people aren't showing up the way that you want them to be the executive, be the manager, and communicate that to them. I always think it's funny when people ask me, well, can I tell them that they need to have their cameras on? Or can I tell them that their lighting isn't good? Or that they need to they need to reposition their computer because all we're seeing is the top of their head because they're reading or something? It's like, are you their manager? Well, yes. Then yes, you can tell them that. Like, if you wouldn't be afraid to tell them in person, you can certainly still communicate that virtually. You don't have to call them out in the middle of the meeting. You can have a private one-on-one with them. But so it seems like communicate what it is that you need, whether you're back in the office or whether you're virtual. And I keep telling people too, it doesn't have to be we messed up because we've never had this conversation. It can simply be, we're obviously continuing in this new realm. And so we think it's time to really set down some protocols and work with your HR team and actually put it into a handbook or something, because then you feel better as a manager, even because there's support for you in saying some of these things that maybe you feel like, well, geez, I don't know, that feels like it's getting picky, or who am I to tell them that they should do something or give them money? That's the other thing. People are like, what?
Right.
It's like, yeah, throw $50 or $100 or something to your employees so that they can purchase that screen for behind them, or that they can upgrade their lighting, or I have a camera on order that I saw one of my, I think maybe I mentioned this last week. It's like it's only like $200. So it's not like a real fancy extra camera. But when I saw this body language dude that I followed, like, I was like, wow, he looks great. So
we do.
Like,
we have an external camera that we use. This is not this one that we use for all of our webinars. And every single time we do a webinar, whether it's paid for a team or if it's for a bar association or something, right away in the chat, there's people saying, your camera is so clear. What kind of camera do you have? I mean, people really do notice, and it really does make a difference to how you're showing up if you can be a little more thoughtful.
Particularly if you're, depending on how long you're going to be in that situation. And for law, I think, it depends on what state you're in. It depends on, how much is opened or how much hasn't. And I think that'll be the lesson for the future, is when it comes to what law is going to look like in the future, as far as mediation, or what things start to happen just virtually because people have gotten used to it, and how much really goes back to 100% in person. It would be kind of interesting to see if there's changes, or if it manages to get back to the way it was. But thank you so much for being here. This has been a very fun conversation, and I hope people have taken a lot out of it, particularly, as I said, the communication piece from the body language side. It really is how you're showing up and being yourself as much as possible, and opening up those lines of communication, no matter where you are or where you're at. So with that, I think we will close out today. I don't think I don't think there were any other questions or anything coming in, but there were people on different modalities I could see on the side, my little ticker of where people are. So have a fantastic week, everybody. Thank you again, Amy. And for sure, if there's a program that you think you want to bring into to your teams, or if you have questions about your career and where you're headed, check her out and sign up for those free clarity calls. I don't know why more people don't do those with individuals, because they're so helpful. So definitely sign up for one of those as well. And we'll see you next Tuesday. And I would tell you who my guest is, but I can't remember off the top of my head who that is. So you'll have to wait for the announcement. I should have looked it up. I know who's coming up in the docket, but I'm not sure who's next Tuesday. So we will stay tuned for that as well. So take care, everybody. Thanks again, Amy.
Thank you. Bye.